Part 2. The Turnover of Capital. Chapter 7. Turnover Time and Number of Turnovers. As we have seen, the overall time of circulation of a given capital is the sum of its circulation time proper and its production time. It is the period of time that elapses from the moment that the capital value is advanced in a particular form until the return of the capital value in process in the same form. The specific purpose of capitalist production is always the valorization of the value advanced, whether this value is advanced in its independent form, i.e. the money form, or in commodities, in which case its value form only possesses an ideal independence in the price of the commodities advanced. In both cases, this capital value passes through different forms of existence in the course of its circuit. Its identity with itself is established in the capitalist ledger, or in the form of money of account. Whether we take the form M to M prime, or the form P to P, both these forms include the following facts. 1. The value advanced functions as capital value and is valorized. 2. After describing its process, it returns to the form in which this process began. In M to M prime, both the valorization of M, the value advanced, and the return of the capital to this form, the money form, are readily apparent. But the same thing also takes place in the second form. For the starting point of P is the presence of the elements of production, commodities of a given value. This form includes the valorization of this value, C prime and M prime, and its return to its original form, since in the second P, the value advanced once again possesses the form of the elements of production in which it was originally advanced. As we saw in the previous volume, if production has a capitalist form, so too will reproduction. Just as in the capitalist mode of production the labor process appears only as a means towards the process of valorization, so in the case of reproduction, it appears only as a means of reproducing the value advanced as capital, i.e. as self-valorizing value. See Volume 1, Chapter 23, page 711. The three forms, M to M prime, P to P, and C prime to C prime, are distinguished in the following ways. In Form 2, that is P to P, the repetition of the process of reproduction, is expressed as a reality, whereas in Form 1 it is only a possibility. Both of these, however, are distinguished from Form 3, insofar as the capital value advanced, whether as money or in the shape of material elements of production, forms the starting point and hence also the point of return. In M to M prime, the return is M prime, equaling M plus small m. If the process is repeated on the same scale, then M again forms the starting point. Small m does not enter into it, but simply shows us that although M has been valorized as capital and thus created a surplus value, it has cast this surplus value off. In the form P to P, the capital value P, advanced in the form of elements of production, forms the point of departure. The form includes its valorization. In the case of simple reproduction, it is the same capital value that begins its process again in the same form. In the case of accumulation, P prime, possessing a value of M prime or C prime, now starts the process as an increased capital value. But the process still begins with capital value advanced in the original form, even if with a greater value than previously. In Form 3, however, the capital value does not begin the process as capital value advanced, but as capital value already valorized, as the total wealth existing in the form of commodities, of which the capital value advanced forms only a part. This latter form is important for Part 3 of the present volume, where the movement of individual capitals will be dealt with in its relationship with the movement of the total social capital. But it cannot be used for the turnover of capital, which always begins with the advance of capital value, in the form either of money or of commodities, and always requires the return of the circling capital value in the form in which it was advanced. Out of Circuits 1 and 2, the former will be adhered to insofar as the influence of the turnover on the formation of surplus value is the main thing under consideration, the latter insofar as its influence on the formation of the product is concerned. Just as the economists have rarely distinguished between the different forms of the circuit, so too they have rarely considered these separately in connection with the turnover of capital. They've generally concentrated on the form M to M prime, because it is this that dominates the individual capitalist and is used by him in his calculations, even if money forms the starting point only in the shape of money of account. Certain others proceed from outlays in the form of elements of production, finishing with the receipt of returns without even mentioning the form of these returns, whether they are in commodities or money. For example, quote, "The economic cycle is the whole course of production, from the time that outlays are made till returns are received. In agriculture, seed time is its commencement, and harvesting is its ending." End quote from S.P. Newman, Elements of Political Economy, Andover, New York, page 81. Others begin with C prime, that is form 3. Quote, "The world of trade may be conceived to revolve in what we shall call an economic cycle, which accomplishes one revolution by business, coming round again through its successive transactions to the point from which it set out. Its commencement may be dated from this point at which the capitalist has obtained those returns by which his capital is replaced to him, whence he proceeds anew to engage his workmen, to distribute among them in wages their maintenance, or rather the power of lifting it, to obtain from them, in finished work, the articles in which he specially deals, to bring these articles to market, and there terminate the orbit of one set of movements by effecting a sale and receiving, in its proceeds, a return for the whole outlays of the period." End quote from T. Chalmers, On Political Economy, 2nd edition, published in Glasgow, 1832, page 85. When the entire capital value that the individual capitalist invests in one branch of production or other has described its cyclical movement, it exists once again in its original form and can then repeat the same process. It has to repeat it if the value is to be perpetuated and valorized as capital value. In the life of the capital, the individual circuit forms only a section that is constantly repeated, i.e., a period. At the close of the period M to M prime, the capital exists once again in the form of money capital and passes once more through the series of changes of form that constitute its process of reproduction and valorization. At the close of the period P to P, the capital exists again in the form of the elements of production, which constitute the premise of its repeated circuit. The circuit of capital, when this is taken not as an isolated act but as a periodic process, is called its turnover. The duration of this turnover is given by the sum of its production time and its circulation time. This period of time forms the capital's turnover time. It thus measures the interval between one cyclical period of the total capital value and the next, the periodicity in the capital's life process, or, if you like, the time required for the renewal and repetition of the valorization and production process of the same capital value. If we disregard the individual occurrences that may accelerate or shorten the turnover time of an individual capital, the turnover times of capitals differ according to their different spheres of investment. As the working day forms the natural measuring unit for the function of labor power, so the year forms the natural measuring unit for the turnovers of capital and process. The natural basis for this measurement is that the most important food crops in the temperate zone, the native ground of capitalist production, are annual products. If we call the year, as measurement unit of the turnover time, U, the turnover time of a particular capital, small u, and the number of its turnovers, small n, then small n is equal to U over small u. If the turnover time small u is 3 months, for example, then small n is equal to 12 over 3, equaling 4. The capital completes 4 turnovers in a year, or turns over 4 times. If small u is equal to 18 months, then small n is equal to 12 over 18, equaling 2/3. The capital only gets through 2/3 of its turnover time in 1 year. If the turnover time amounts to several years, then it is reckoned in terms of multiples of a year. For the capitalist, the turnover time of his capital is the time for which he has to advance his capital in order for this to be valorized and for him to receive it back in its original shape. Before we investigate more closely the influence of turnover on the production and valorization process, we have to consider 2 new forms which capital obtains as a result of the circulation process, and which affect the form of its turnover.